What is up, plant people? Hey, it is Friday, August 20th, 2021. It's time for a bonus episode of Planthropology. Normally, we talk about some really cool plant people and their really cool plant people things. But today, I've got something special for you, and we're going to talk to a really cool podcast person. So this is an episode that I've been trying to coordinate for a couple of weeks, and I have played like podcast recording tag with several people for like a couple of weeks. My life has been crazy. I may be a little delirious. It's been a long week. I've been in meetings all day. I was in meetings most of the day yesterday, recording most of the day yesterday. And class starts on Monday. And I have 153 students this semester. Y'all pray for me. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be great. Everything is fine. But after finally finding a time to record, I got the chance to talk to Dave Keine, who is the head of product and marketing at a great company called Podchaser. So Podchaser, if you don't know, is kind of like the IMDb of podcasts. It's a place where whether you're a podcast host or a podcast guest, you can have credits for the things that you do in the podcast world. And if you're a podcast listener, you can go see ratings and reviews. You can go find out who is a part of all these different shows. It's interactive. As Dave will talk about, there's a lot of cool features and a lot of really, really cool features coming up soon. Even a couple of exclusives just for Planthropology. So Dave and I spoke months ago. He had posted something on Twitter one day just saying, hey, what new features would you like to see on Podchaser? And I gave them a couple of suggestions, and he messaged me later and was like, or actually commented back on Twitter itself, on the thread itself, saying, hey, these are cool ideas. I'd like to chat with you. So, normally when a big seemingly faceless Twitter account or company says something like that, it's like, oh, okay, whatever. Well, I was like, okay, whatever, I'll message. So I messaged Podchaser, and Dave responded, and we actually talked a couple days later, and he was serious, and he heard out my suggestions, and we had a great chat. And so recently when they had posted that they wanted to start getting on more shows to kind of spread the good word of Podchaser, I jumped all over that because, again, I am a big fan of Dave, and I'm a huge fan of Podchaser and what they do. So you'll learn a lot more about this service, whether you're a podcaster, a podcast listener, anyone in between, throughout this episode. One thing I will mention, we had some technical difficulties as we recorded this. So Dave's audio is not always as clean through this as I would want it to be. But I really wanted to get this out because there's some really important content, some really great thoughts on interaction between podcasters and podcast listeners, and how on both ends of that we can make this whole experience better. So right quick, here's a plug for my stuff. Go check out Planthropology on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Search for Planthropology, look for the bristlecone pine, and that's me. You can find me and whatever was left of my self-respect over on TikTok as @ThePlantProf. But I don't want to belabor this much more, and I really want to jump into this special bonus episode. Again, it's Friday. Happy weekend with my Podchaser friend, Dave Keine. All right. Well, we are back with a special bonus episode of Planthropology. And my guest today is the head of product and marketing with Podchaser. And we have talked a couple times over the past, year or so about some different stuff. And I'm on with Dave Keine. And Podchaser, if you've never used it, whether you're a podcaster or a podcast listener, is kind of like the best repository of podcast information, in my opinion, like where you can find reviews and information and episodes and all of that. And Podchaser had posted something a couple of weeks ago on Twitter about wanting to get on some different shows and tell the story. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity. So Dave, how are you today?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on. This is fun. I'm glad that we can connect again. I know you and I talked a little bit before about just kind of generally, podcastery things, but this is a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we'll just kind of jump right in. I want to hear more about you before we really get into the details of Podchaser and some of the other stuff, because, as our listeners of Planthropology are used to, this show is really about the people as much as the subject matter. So tell me a little bit about your background. What'd you do in school? Where are you from? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I'm kind of drawn to your podcast in general is I'm actually undergrad. I was a bio major,
Okay.
so I like plants. I did the whole botany thing, but I got to the end of school and I was like, I don't really want to go work in a lab for the rest of my life. So I ended up getting my MBA and moving into the advertising world. Kind of a big departure there, but worked in advertising for a long time as an art director, creative director, and kind of around, I guess it'd be around 2013, 2014 is when I was commuting a lot, like a lot of people listening to podcasts. And around that time, the Gimlet show Startup came out.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, there is an actual like industry here. Like this could be a business. So what I ended up doing was just contacting everybody that I could, whether it was listening to the credits and calling up a producer of a show I liked, or using my presence as an advertising person to just send an email to a salesperson, be like, "Hey, how does advertising work?" All that. So I just taught myself podcasting in a sense, and then kind of leveraged that to get our agency up and running with podcast ad sales. Moved that into content, struck out on my own to do my own content studio. And then I had been talking to the guys at Podchaser for a long time. I had used their service to help grow my own shows. And they had an opening to do their marketing, and they weren't going to pay me or anything. It was kind of a sweat equity thing. But I liked them a lot. Not many opportunities come along to join a really up and coming startup. So I jumped at it. About 6 months later, they came to me and said, "Hey, you're pretty good at this marketing thing. How would you also like to tackle the product, which is like the website and the roadmap and feature development?" And I was like, "I don't want to do that." And they're like, "Okay, you're still going to do that." So now I have two jobs. I oversee product and marketing here, and a really easy way to kind of think about that is want to get more people using Podchaser, and we think that the best way to do that is to actually make Podchaser good, and make it useful to people. So yeah, that's going well. Podchaser itself is growing like crazy, and we're excited for the future. But yeah,
That's exciting, and that's like you said, that's not the kind of opportunity that just comes along, every day. So that's cool that you jumped on it, and I know that's probably a lot of work getting started, and especially when they're like, "Well, you're a volunteer for now,"
Yeah. I was lucky because I had my own business when I made the jump over here.
Sure.
So I was running a content studio, and the idea of not making money for myself versus not making money in a startup isn't that big of a jump, I guess.
I hear you.
It wasn't too hard to make that decision. In my point of view, it was, this is an opportunity that I have to jump at. Whereas on my content side, I could potentially pick that up 10 years from now. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's a lot of people out there that on the podcaster side too, that are like, I'd like to start this, but I think a lot of times the first place people's brains go is, how do I make money on this? And it's like, well, in my opinion, it's somewhat of a crowded space, even though like there's always room for more podcasts, right? Like there's always room for another podcast about whatever, because you'll find a niche audience, and that's kind of how it works. But I mean, I think kind of like you were talking about, the first thing you got to do is build a good product, build a good show, build a good platform, whatever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, if you're getting into podcasting to make money, that's perfectly fine. A lot of people do that. You just have to make sure that that is actually what your guiding light is. And
right.
If you're looking to make money, you're maybe going to approach it differently than if somebody's looking to, build, a sustainable pathway to actually like support maybe their current day job or anything like that, or maybe they just want to get their voice out into the world. But yeah, if what you said about treating it kind of like a product and all that, we talked about that. I did a talk at Podcast Movement about that a little bit, of like if you want to treat it as a product, you got to make sure there's a value proposition there, right? Like when somebody hits that play button, in a sense, it's a transaction. They're giving you their time and their attention. And if you don't come through on that, then that's a that's a lost listener. And whether you're doing it for money or not, the listeners are what separates us out from us talking to ourselves in the closet. So um, we should always keep an eye towards them, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I absolutely agree. And I actually have a couple of questions along that here in a little bit. But real quick, you said that you had started a couple of your own podcasts. So what are you still doing those? Do you still have your own podcasts?
No, I dropped it. So I started a couple podcasts when I was at the agency I was at, and those kind of ran their lifespan, I guess. And when I went onto my own to create my own, I only made two shows.
Okay.
One specifically was not going to live past 7 episodes. It's a mini series. It's a kids audio drama adventure Christmas thing. So that was actually an experiment to just see, like, hey, every year I watch Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Can we do something like that with podcasting?
Yeah.
And so far, it's not Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, but it does come back every year, which is nice.
That's cool.
And then on the other side, I worked on more of a traditional, like guest interview talk kind of podcast where it was kind of like famous YouTuber talks to famous YouTuber. It went really well. We got around 2 million listens in our first year.
Wow.
But we also added video to it. We also added a Patreon to it, and it actually became its own thing. And just at that point, it was kind of stretching myself too thin. But yeah, I still have that hunger for content. Making content's so much fun. You get to do everything. It's a lot of fun.
And it's a little bit addicting. Like I have found, it's, starting your first podcast is like a gateway drug to starting another podcast. And I'm in this podcast network called Podfix, and they invited me, I don't know, last fall sometime. And then one of the first things that we did when I started was they do this, I'm going to say this wrong because I say it wrong every time, Napod Pomo. It's like NaNoWriMo where they write every day. They're like, you're going to release podcast content every day. And I was like, oh crap, I don't want to that's a lot. And so I started like a side project and just did little 5 to 10 minute micro episodes just about whatever happened to be on my mind that day. And then I stuck with it for a few weeks after that. And I was like, it's too much to do. Like my main show, Planthropology, and then this other, but I've got it parked there. It's called the Plant Prof. And when November comes around, I'm sure they'll want to do it again. So I can pick it up and do another 30 episodes.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think when people are starting new podcasts, that's the most daunting thing. It's just actually talking into a microphone, recording it, getting it out there. And it's like any other muscle or skill. The more you do it, not only do you get better at it, but you crave it, right?
Yeah.
If I went running every single day, I would probably around 12 o'clock be like, I want to go running. So that's awesome. I love that concept of just hit record every day. That's great.
Just see what happens.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about Podchaser specifically. And I don't necessarily know that we need to get super down into the weeds on some of the technical stuff, but for those of and y'all have grown a ton, I feel like, in the past couple of years. And, even just since I've become aware of it, it's gotten so much bigger and your reach has gotten so much bigger. But can you tell us just a little bit for those that don't know, what is Podchaser? How does it work? And what's the point?
Yeah. The what is Podchaser question is one we constantly struggle with. Podchaser is a very large company without really trying to be a large company. So what we are is basically a database that has a social media kind of overlay to it. And everything we do is trying to be a discovery platform. So when you go to podchaser.com, it works very similar to IMDb or Goodreads or something like that. And you can come on there and you can do You can see what your friends are listening to. You can rate and review podcasts and episodes. You can create shareable lists. And then since we're a database, all of the information around a podcast is added to the website itself. So we have credits. We have over 12 million host, guest, producer credits. We have a whole bunch of tags, and people can come on and they can crowdsource that, and it all goes through our moderation, so that people can basically make Podchaser smarter and a better discovery mechanism for their friends. Now, that is a very hard concept to kind of distill down, because it is very kind of feature heavy, all of that. I would say what we're trying to do really is take like the fire hose of data and recommendations and all that and turn it into a drinking fountain, so that it's really easy to find podcasts that you might be interested in. It's very easy to interact with podcasts that you like, and really just kind of being a podcast first platform, if that makes sense.
Sure. Oh yeah. And like, you're right though, that there is like a fire hose or an ocean of information out there. And, I think last number I saw is there's over 2 million podcasts now. Like, that's a lot of voices, right? And, that's at different levels of activity and all of that. And I think that's globally it gets complicated in a hurry. And you're on Twitter a lot too, I'm sure. And like one of the scariest like phrases you can put on Twitter is podcast recommendations. Like, I need podcasts, because I don't want to step on anyone's toes saying this, but like under any one of those recommendations, it's like 1,000 links of, oh, you should listen to my podcast. You should listen to my podcast. And I get it. Like, I get the impulse. I've done it too. Like, oh, you need to listen to me, like, out of all this noise. So I think the fact that Podchaser can drill some of that down and be like, okay, yes, you're looking for podcast recommendations. Maybe instead of just like throwing it out there to the internet, which is always a scary proposition, like, oh, here's a place you can go and search by category, search by keywords, search by all these things, and find some curated content that is maybe less daunting.
Absolutely. So one of I guess you would call it like a core value or something like that to Podchaser is everything needs to be sustainable. So when it comes to like our growth as a company, like, we don't want to just go throw a bunch of money into ads and boost it up. We want like sustainable growth. When we make our data pipelines, we want them to be sustainable so that when we add new features in the future, it doesn't break. All of that is kind of how we look at it. And when it comes to creating tools for podcasters and to like really hone in on that discovery problem, we want it to be a sustainable growth platform for podcasters.
Right.
And so with social media, I get it. We're on social media. You need to be on social media if you're out there today. But understanding that social media, a lot of the times, especially when you're first getting out, is a 20 minutes after you post, nobody's going to see it again.
Right.
Like it has a very, very, very short half-life. So what we try to do is to take the things around a podcast, things like credits, things like people leaving ratings or reviews, and almost like set it in stone so that people can come back to it and can find it again. And one of the really unique things about us is because we're not an app that locks things behind a user law or a user wall or a specific device or anything. What we do is it's all a website. And so it's all going to show up in a Google search result. And if I'm a podcaster out there and I want to grow my show, whether it's for monetization or just because I want an audience, the way to think about Podchaser really is as an organic search growth mechanism. So if you come on there, you add your information about your guests, add information about your podcast, add yourself to different categories, create lists that you think your audience would be interested in, such as like the top 10 plant podcasts or anthropology podcasts or any of that. It's just going to go into Google and it's going to go to the top, and you're going to get constant traffic every single day rather than, oh my God, I haven't tweeted yet. I have to tweet and, oh, yay, 2 people liked it.
Yeah.
It really allows for that kind of sustainable growth.
That's such an interesting point too, because we as podcasters are creating evergreen content, right? It's not like a radio show where you listen or it's gone. It's evergreen content. But then we market it in a completely different way, right? Like you were saying, on social media, you tweet, okay, yeah, it gets attention for a little bit, then it's gone. So we don't, this is actually a great evergreen marketing strategy. And it matches maybe better with the platform than social media does.
Yeah. And to be clear, social media is still a huge part of this. And I think community building is big. But yeah, it's like, look, I want to go live on a beach and have my podcast continue to grow without me, kind of thing. And the only way to do that is to kind of play the game of search engine optimization and creating these streams of new listeners that are going to come and hit play for the first time. And then a certain percentage of those maybe sticks around for 3 episodes and becomes a subscriber. So where we need to, like, as podcasters and everything, think about growing our shows is just, how do I make this to where I can do something today that's going to get me 5 listeners every week for the rest of the time? And that's what I did with Podchaser before I got here. And it's still working. So I mentioned I had a Christmas podcast, right? It's an audio drama Christmas podcast, comes around every year.
Yeah.
What I did is I went on to Podchaser and I made a list of the best Christmas podcasts. Put my number 1. I checked out all the others, made sure they were good, added them into my list, and put a nice description, cool SEO friendly title, published that. And in about like 3 to 4 weeks, it was in the top 3 results on Google.
Wow.
So people just kind of kept finding it. But the real secret weapon to all of this is that there are so many blogs out there, publications, that their entire content strategy is basically to just go find a keyword. And, hey, John, you're going to go write about this keyword. And a lot of times that comes up to topic podcasts. They want to hit that keyword. So they might look at, Christmas podcast, baseball podcast, or they may look at, educational podcast. And these people are good writers, but they're not necessarily familiar with everything in podcasting. So their first move is to go Google Christmas podcast. They find my list on there. They copy my list. They put it onto their own thing. All of a sudden, I go from being on a Podchaser list near the top of Google to where now our podcast, without putting out a new episode or doing any kind of marketing, is now in like 13 different lists when you search for best Christmas podcast. And that's how we get, every year now, we get sustainable new traffic to our site that kind of just is fun. Like, I'm not monetizing it, but it's fun.
Yeah.
But even outside of like the Christmas season, we still get like thousands of listens every month just because we're at the top of those. So you can use Podchaser as a way to kind of generate that sustainable growth or that sustainable traffic that's just going to help you like go out and live on a beach for a while or feel like you don't have to tweet every second of the day.
And that's really such a useful thing. And I'm just thinking about my own podcast as you're talking about this. And I've got a couple of lists on Podchaser, and that's something that I want to like. I use it quite a bit, like for searching and looking and connecting with people. But one thing that I want to start doing more of is actually like purposefully and in a directed sort of way, reviewing podcasts and like putting more of my thoughts and content into it, building more lists and those kinds of things. But search engine optimization, when you say those words to someone, if they've never heard it, it seems like just this big, I have no idea how to do this. It can be daunting for sure. But the fact that you can do it all within the same platform, just by building a good list, just by taking a couple of hours to write good descriptions and like Google, like looking up Google keywords and search terms and all that. It's really, really important.
Absolutely. And it's like SEO, search engine optimization, is daunting. Like it's huge.
Yeah.
It's part of my job that I could probably spend, 28 hours a day working on it. And add in a couple hours. But at its, like, what podcasters need to know about this is less about like backlink building and all this stuff. It's just think about what somebody who would be a listener of your podcast but just doesn't know you exist yet, what would they be searching? So, I have Christmas podcasts, but it's also a podcast for kids. So maybe somebody's going to be searching, children's podcast or kids podcast or audio drama adventure podcast. All that is a good way to come up with your keywords as well. And then you just put into the line, like, make sure you have that phrase, and it can be the best of these. It could be 10 top Christmas podcasts, anything like that. And then Podchaser does a lot of work for you. So we have, like, they call it domain authority. Basically, we're trusted by Google.
Okay.
So that's why our lists do really well. Like, we rank number 1 or top 5 for thousands of different lists. So you could kind of come on there and just treat it as, okay, I know I have a good show, and I know this is the type of person that's going to be looking for it, and this is how they would be searching for that. What are the things they would be searching for? And then you can make lists and kind of back into it that way. You don't have to go super in depth into all of it. But yeah,
that's awesome. So kind of switching gears just a little bit. We've been talking about on the podcaster end, like how to use Podchaser, and I think that you've given some great tips on different ways to engage with the platform and do different things. So for those of my listeners that are just that, listeners, they're not creating their own podcast, how should they be viewing and using Podchaser in your opinion?
Yeah, Podchaser is an excellent, and this is biased, an excellent platform for listeners. And the reason is because we allow you to find new podcasts based on what you listen to, right? So there's a couple different ways to use it. One is you can go on there and you can follow people who you're friends with. You can follow tastemakers. If there's a critic that you really like and they leave reviews, you can find new podcasts that way. You can also go on there. We have like a strong search feature, categories, all of that stuff to find the podcast that you're looking for. But in general, it's going to surface more opportunities to find new podcasts and what's out there. On the other side is we've actually talked to a lot of listeners who are interested in almost becoming tastemakers. So being able to go on there and leave ratings and reviews that other people are going to see, they're going to like it, they're going to give it a little heart, and you're able to kind of build up your own following as almost like a Roger Ebert of podcasting.
Yeah.
And so that's a handy thing. I would say, the most handy thing that I've found is we have a feature called bookmarking, which is as you go through the site, you just have this little bookmark icon next to every episode. And you can just quickly hit that bookmark button, and that's going to save it to your quote unquote bookmarks. And we allow you to export your bookmarks to an RSS feed and load it into whatever app you're using, whether it's Pocket Cast or Podcast Guru or even Apple Podcasts lets you do this. And then every time you go around the site, if you see something that's interesting, like, oh, that looks like a good episode, or, oh, they just released a new episode of this that I really want to check out, you just hit that bookmark button. It shows up in your app.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's like Pocket or Instapaper for podcasts. And that is the single most like game-changing thing for me as a listener. Is that's just how I listen to things, because you get on Podchaser and you see new stuff, or maybe your friend rated something. You're like, I want to check that out. Maybe I don't want to subscribe yet, but I want to check it out. Just hit that button and it shows up automatically. But yeah, like use it to discover podcasts, use it to interact with podcasts. And then if you want to be a tastemaker, we're kind of doubling down on that. And there's going to be some cool stuff that comes out of that.
That's awesome. And that is such a useful feature, the bookmarking thing, because like I'll see a podcast pop up on like Twitter or whatever, and someone will share a new episode. It gets, someone likes it or whatever, and it pops up. Right. That's how how that algorithm's designed to work. But then like sometimes the link that gets shared is like to a website or to a player that I don't have. Like I'm one of these weird Android users. And so like if someone shares like an Apple Podcast link, it's not useful to me. Like I can't use that very well, or I have to go through an extra step and go and copy the link and go to my player. So the fact that like I've started in general, when I share a new episode, I will generally share a Podchaser link, because that is a great way for people to like import it into whatever app they're using or listen to it on the platform. And I've seen like my listen numbers actually from Podchaser start to go up a little bit. People are actually listening on the platform itself, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, we get close to like 500,000 people listening to podcasts every month on our service. And like you said, because we're not an app that is locked away, people can come on and they can listen to it. They don't have to log in. They don't have to log in to see any kind of like ratings and reviews. And then every episode page has an open in the app of your choice button. So it is a good place to just kind of treat as an agnostic app that you can, or service that you can use to share podcasts.
Well, and I think another cool feature, so I'm looking at your profile right now, which I don't know if that's creepy or not as we talk, but whatever. But like there's a lot of cool stuff on here. So like you can see how many followers you have, you can see who you're following. So like if, like you say, if you find a reviewer, creator, whatever that you like, you can go and say, oh, okay, what does this guy listen to, and go through that. But also there's like stats, right? So you've got 756 ratings, which puts you at number 17, and 231 reviews. So like people love a game, right? People like to win and see themselves on a list and like highly ranked and all that. So that's another, I think, really cool feature.
I feel like you're reading my mind a little bit, or maybe we talked about this before.
We may have.
But yeah, like we are at the 99% mark right now with releasing kind of two big updates to all of this. So one is on our creator profiles, which is kind of what we call our credits. It's like your public face that would have all of your credits of things you've done. We're going to be adding stats there to where you can not only see like how many followers somebody has, but how many credits they have, and then also how many guest credits
they have, cool.
Which is a nice kind of change there, because we have a lot of people who use Podchaser as like almost like their LinkedIn for guest appearances, where it's like, hey, I want to be on your show. Check these out. This is what I've done. So that's going to help kind of make those stats a little bit more apparent. But then also on the other side with the stats on the user pages and leaving reviews and ratings and all that, we're going to be releasing what's called, I guess this is an exclusive. So we're going to be releasing what's called like super reviewers, which is you get to a certain threshold of reviews that you've left on the site, and you're going to be a super reviewer. And so you'll have like a badge that follows you around the site. You're going to have prominent placing on different parts of the website. So when people look for people to follow, they know that these people are, tastemakers. They're people who review a lot of podcasts. Maybe there's somebody who I need to pay attention to. And we're going to be doing a bunch of more stuff like that, moving up our stats to make them a little bit more prominent, so that, even if, you're following your friends, you may find other people whose tastes you align with that you can follow as well to see what they're listening to. So there is a lot of cool stuff that's coming out. You got the exclusive.
No, that's exciting. I'm really pretty pumped about that, because again, any way that you can engage more, like I think any way that like, I don't know, things can be more interactive, I think that is always useful, and that's always like a thing that we should be kind of striving towards. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, look, like from our top like business goals, what we want to do is combine the kind of intrinsic data, so like the numbers, the categories, all that stuff, with the human side of things. So, there's no algorithm in the world that's going to tell you if something's 5 stars or 2 stars. So we're trying to kind of marry those worlds. And one of the things that we really believe in is that the power of a human recommendation to others is going to outweigh any kind of, algorithm or any kind of, hey, we think you might like this, is a lot different than, hey, my friend Jim, said I would like this. So we really want to give that power to the users and let them determine what's popular rather than us kind of trying to curate it or come up with some kind of, one size fits all situation.
Well, and that actually leads me into another point I wanted to kind of get to. And you mentioned ratings and different ratings and all that. So I actually just today, and it's funny that this happened today, got my first 2-star rating for my podcast. And
congrats!
Thank you. I feel like I've made it now. I'm a real podcaster now. And one of the features that I really like about Podchaser, as compared to some of the other, review platforms that are popular, whatever, is it's easy to like respond to things, right? So, and what I found actually reading through reviews on a lot of different shows, is that a lot of the comments that get left, especially sometimes with these lower ratings, are more constructive. I think on some other platforms, you'll get a 1-star rating that just says like, you suck or whatever, and on this, like this person that left me a rating actually left me a reason, like a fairly well thought out reason that they gave me 2 stars. And I was able to respond and try to address some of those concerns and just say, hey, no, I get it. Like, the format doesn't match with you. Here are a few episodes from my catalog that might fit what you're looking for a little bit later. Because essentially they said, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z, and I didn't find it in the episodes I listened to. So it's easy for me to go back and say, okay, no, I get that. Here's some other things you might like. And if not, thanks for the time, right? Thanks for your time.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a good use of the reply feature. And look, like nobody likes a 2-star review.
No.
But like you said, there is some stuff that we can learn. Like there's a big, I guess, like divergence of thought between like don't read the comments and read the comments. I worked with a YouTuber. His name's Kevin Lieber. He has like millions of subscribers, and he doesn't need to read the comments, but he does because he finds that there could be a grain of truth in there.
Sure.
A lot of times it's just like, hey, I don't like your hat, but there is stuff that we can learn. And so what we want to try to do with like the reply feature is to give you a voice in that, right? Like if this person just, is a a-hole and they want to, crap on your podcast, then that's one thing. If they have something to say, we want to give you the opportunity to set the record straight or to just, let them know that there's a human being on the other side. But yeah, like this isn't going to be something that podcasters like, but in general, we kind of want to incentivize non-5-star reviews because there's a lot more interesting things in there. I think one of the issues that we're trying to handle is how do you get over the like Uberification of a 5-star review system, which is if you leave anybody less than 5 stars on Uber, it's almost like an affront. And a lot of people who listen to podcasts kind of treat it the same way. So what we're looking to do is, I don't think we're going to change the way that they interact with anybody or anything. But what we can do is do some fancy math that I don't understand. And I think it's called like Bayesian or something, maybe to where if somebody leaves 5-star ratings, maybe their 5-star rating, counts in a different way than somebody who always leaves 2-star ratings and this time they left a 5-star rating.
Right.
So we are trying to figure out how to incentivize, but also bring some clarity so that not everything is 5 stars on our site. I know that's probably not good as a podcaster. We all want our 5 stars, but we're trying to make it a little bit more useful.
Well, you know what? I actually love that because, I, being nerdy, professor guy, I think that's some really complicated statistics in a lot of ways. And I can't imagine trying to like code that, but it's really useful because so this is an aside, but part of my dissertation was in survey responses. And there's an inherent bias in survey responses all the time, right? Like when you go and you take those Likert scale surveys that are like, strongly disagree to agree, people tend towards the 5-star. They tend towards the positive, especially because that's the way we frame it a lot of times. And like if you listen to podcasts, podcasters will go, "Oh, leave me a 5-star review," and that's I get that. I do that too. I get it. But if there was a way to weight it, so based on past performance or past activity, yeah, maybe you score more points getting a 5-star review from someone who averages a 3-star review or whatever. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think also we'll probably be rolling out things like, if you get your first 2-star review, like that's a badge of honor. You should kind of be rewarded for that, because that means people actually care, which is awesome. And then I think one of the things that we're currently debating is, do we stay with 5 stars or do we move to a 10-star system or 10 system? It's 5 stars is the de facto for podcasting. It's been around. It comes from Apple Podcasts, other services that have reviews on maybe like their specific app do it as well. But there is definitely something where you look at a movie on IMDb, like the best movies I think are rated like 8.7 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
A really good movie would be 8 out of 10. But if you looked at a 4 out of 5-star review, it's almost like we focus on that 1-star difference instead of, hey, this is 80%. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So we are looking to change it. And I'd be curious to know like what your audience thinks, if they want to let us know like, oh no, keep 5 stars, or let's go to 10s.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to hear. So if you're listening to this and you want to connect on social media and let us know, or send an email, whatever, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too. I personally like the 10 based system or whatever, the 10 rating system, because you get more resolution, right? Like it's better data.
What I don't know, and this is the grand scheme, and we're just not set up currently to test this, is would everyone just rate things 10 stars or 10 out of 10? Like, would we just carry over the 5 out of 5 into that, or would we be more nuanced? Who knows? What the 10 basically is half stars, but for some reason there's just a psychological difference between giving half star versus giving a 9 instead of an 8.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I don't, that's hard to answer. Again, IMDb does it well. You get pretty good data on that. Rotten Tomatoes kind of went a slightly different way with the way they process their data, but it's similar in some ways, right? It's on a percentage scale. And what's interesting on like, this is not about Rotten Tomatoes, but you get 2 different things. Like you get an audience score plus like a critic score, and that's a very interesting dynamic that brings in. That's a whole other conversation probably.
Absolutely.
But so I don't want to, take up your whole day. I really appreciate your thoughts, because as a podcaster and as a podcast, I'm a consumer too. And I think most of us are, where I listen to a ton of shows, and, if I look through my podcatcher, I've probably subscribed to like 100 shows, which is overwhelming in some ways. But like, so do you have, we've talked a lot about directions that y'all are going and things that y'all are doing. Is there anything else that maybe we didn't cover that you'd like the listeners to kind of know about?
I think in general, what we're trying to do is, you probably heard how hard it is to describe what Podchaser is. We also have a situation currently on our site, which is that there's a lot you can do on Podchaser. And if you want to go find the top podcasts hosted by Libsyn and released in 2016, like you can go find all of that, right? So what we're trying to do is maybe make it a little bit easier for people to use the website, to use the different filters, to just in general see everything. So I'd love to just kind of have people come try it out and make sure that they come back, because releasing new things all the time, and we're trying to make things a lot easier to use. And I think we're at a good point right now to where, we have, I think it's over like 2 million people every month come to our site.
Wow.
So we're growing really steadily every month. But we're still, in the grand scheme of things, we're not the biggest in the world. So I'd love to just kind of have people along for the ride. And then our door is always open if you have any kind of feature request, or if you'd love to see like, oh man, like I'd love to see 10 out of 10 ratings instead of 5 stars, or, it'd be really cool is if we had, if the bookmarking worked on this page versus on this page. So yeah, I think in general, we've got a lot that's coming out, but the takeaway is that we're really dedicated to building what's going to matter to a listener. And I'd love to kind of bring them along for the ride on that.
That's awesome. So what I normally do on my regular episodes, and I don't see a reason not to do it now, at the end of the episode is I like to throw a question at my guests and ask if you had a piece of advice for the listener. And it can be honestly about anything. It could be like, don't eat gas station sushi. I don't care. Like, what would that be? What would you like, if there's one takeaway, or if there's one thing that you would like the however many people listen to this to kind of keep with them, what would that be? Easy questions, right?
That's a really good question. If I had the opportunity to tell everybody here what I think they should do, beyond go sign up for Podchaser, it's free. I would say, in general, like we're talking about podcasting, let's not stray from that. It's important to remember that podcasting is a human medium. It's really easy to turn it into, it's, I just turn on the radio and it's listening, or, I didn't like this, screw that person. Like there's a human being behind every single microphone. And if we kind of take that approach, I think we realize that a lot of these people are putting out podcasts for free out of the goodness of their heart. Maybe they have dreams and aspirations, and maybe they want to monetize, or maybe they are monetizing. But there is a human being out there who is giving you content for free for the most part. And take an opportunity to just let them know that you're listening. Let them know you appreciate what they're doing. It can be in the form of a review, but it can also just be like, hey, shoot somebody an email. Everybody's podcast out there has an email address associated with it. They almost always have websites. They even have social media. Just shoot them a line like that. That can go a long way to just helping somebody feel like, there's people out there listening, and that, they're going to keep going. So there's always a person here. Remember that. Be kind and let them know you're listening.
Very cool. Yes. And I 100% agree with all of that. That's awesome. So Dave, where all can people find you?
You can find me on Podchaser. My username on Podchaser, if you just search my name, which I'm sure you'll put in like the show notes or something. Yeah. But my username is just at my last name on there. You can go find what I'm listening to, lists I'm making, all that. On social media, I tweet more than anything, but I still tweet very far and in between. It's at Hey Keine, which again, you can find it. But really, my outlet is Podchaser. We're at Podchaser everywhere. We ask silly questions. We post the ramblings of a madman. So usually Twitter is where people find us if they want the maximum weird of Podchaser. But yeah, like podchaser.com and then at Podchaser. And then if you really want to find me, I'm on both social media and on Podchaser.
Cool. Well, I'll post links to all that in the show notes. And Podchaser is a good follow on Twitter, by the way. It's fun, and I'll say one last thing because I like to brag on y'all because I really like this podcast or this platform. And like again, they are real people on. Like it's weird because it's like from Podchaser, but it's like almost like you can tell there's a real human behind it, right? Because it's not just like here's a link to this, here's a link to this. It's like I don't know what type of deli meat goes best with podcast or whatever. And
I'm stealing that. That's a good one.
Oh.
What type of deli meat goes best with podcast? If that gets more than 50 likes, I'll send you something.
Rad. Hey, I dig it.
Yeah, and also I'm sitting here. I don't know why I have never done this on a guest episode. So you can leave ratings and reviews for podcasts and individual episodes. If you're listening to this, go make my guest appearance like the #1 rated episode of Plant Apology. I would love that.
Yo, that's great.
Something we would shout from the rooftops, like, haha, look at you guys. And we get to take that back to our team and be like, I'm so influential.
I dig it. Yeah, no, let's let Dave win in the office. I think that's great. Well, man, I always enjoy talking with you. It's you're a wealth of information and just a cool guy. So I've really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, man. This has been a lot of fun. Let's do it again sometime.
Sounds great. Well, to all of y'all listening, thanks for doing so, and go leave a nice and or honest review for a podcast that you listen to, and keep being cool, and I will talk to you soon.